Nigel, Pollard, and Stephen Harrison. Welcome, and it's been a pleasure to have you both here. And now this time we're having an informal and relaxed conversation between now me as a former student of my former supervisors. So how how how's everything today, and how now you've been going this process of post Easter break, and now the marking process.
I mean, I'm on research leave, so it's amazing because I'm not doing that. So yeah, I'm just kind of chilling out doing some research, thinking about a new project, which is fun.
Okay,
Uh,
what kind of project?
Well, for the first time since I started my PhD in 2011, I've got to come up with a new project. So I've been exploring, I guess, what I might do with the next 5 years or 10 years or however long a project takes. So trying to think about kind of big questions, and maybe we'll come to this later on. I think, you've just finished the PhD, and if you're thinking about future research, the kind of obvious thing is what would the next chapter of the PhD be? And then when the PhD becomes a book, the obvious thing to think about is what would the next kind of chapter in the book I've just written be? And I very much don't want to do that. I want to do something new. So I've been exploring different kinds of things.
Okay, we can talk about that a bit
Yeah.
further.
and it's nice to talk to you in a slightly different
Yeah.
environment now that you've finished your PhD, on which congratulations. But
Yeah.
Thank you.
You
so
look a lot
yeah,
more chilled out, Louis, than the last time I saw you.
Yes.
Which is completely understandable. You look like a man who is a few months removed now from
Yeah.
the kind of end game.
Yes. So first of all, thank you, and also thank you for being my supervisors. Then you've been just being on my side for 6 years, so to speak, since the beginning of my masters, and that was a really great achievement. Now, as you said, I'm a bit more relaxed, but at the same time, I got to. I was literally before doing this, running the tests and everything. I was writing my future article for a volume about ancient migrations, and that was a result from my latest conference, last conference I presented at in Coimbra at the Celtic Classics, and so I'm relaxed and I need to focus on that this next little chapter, and just
Yeah.
doing the old things, seeking a job within the field and see how it goes, both academic and non-academic.
Mm.
But we've been in conversations on that, so
well,
so what who would like to start off telling about your academic background and what led you to decide to do your PhD?
You go first, Nigel.
Yeah.
all right, because I'm the oldest.
You're
Um,
Louis's first supervisor. You should go
so
first.
I finished my PhD in like 1993, 1994. So it was quite a long time ago. Um, but I did my PhD at the University of Michigan in the US. Stephen and I both did our undergraduate degrees in the same place in the UK, but I think we've got very different career paths in academia since then. So in terms of how I got into doing a PhD, my PhD is in classical archaeology, classical art and archaeology, technically, but that and I mean it's not. So when I was an undergraduate, I did classics undergraduate degree, and before I'd done that, I'd done some field archaeology as a teenager, and I was put off doing field archaeology before I was an undergraduate. But then after I'd been an undergraduate for a year, I ended up going on a field project in Italy, and I kind of rediscovered archaeology. And I wanted to do more of that, and I was mixing with academics who were working on that field project, and so kind of talking to people, and so that got me sort of interested in the idea of carrying archaeology forward. And initially, I wasn't so much focused on doing a PhD. And what I started doing actually after I graduated was applying to do master's level archaeological science degrees in things like environmental archaeology and archaeological petrology, study of ceramics and things like that. But it was kind of an odd time because those were notionally scientific courses, but they were also in archaeology, and the funding bodies at the time couldn't get their heads together over the idea of something that was science within a humanities thing. So neither of the humanities or the science funding bodies in the country at that point were willing to fund that kind of degree, and you couldn't get loans to do that sort of thing. But I worked as a field archaeologist for a few years, and it was poorly paid and it was short contract work, and I didn't love the mechanics of working out in muddy wet fields in Gloucestershire enough to want to continue to do that. So I decided either to do a PhD, which seemed to me a bit more glamorous than the muddy fields in Gloucestershire, if I could get funding to do that. And I was at that point I was applying to the US because the funding environment in the UK was very different from what it is now. But the alternative was to get a proper job. So I was applying for jobs in as a trainee accountant in City of London financial firms, and I was holding an offer from a City of London accountancy firm when I got the offer of PhD funding, mostly by working part-time at the University of Michigan. And at that point I thought, well, okay, I might as well give it a try. I'll go to the US for a year, see how it goes. And so I went to the US and I did my PhD there. So that was the story of how I came to do a PhD.
Yeah, I think you're right, Nigel. Mine's a little bit different in that I did my undergrad degree in history and studied a wide range of different topics. And in my second year, I did a module on kind of the ancient Greek world. And as part of that, we were writing a weekly essay, and I did an essay on Alexander. And I happened to do the essay on Alexander pretty much the week we were asked to think about what our dissertation topics should be for third year. And I was like, oh, this seems interesting, so maybe I'll do that. So then I did my third year undergrad dissertation in history, but doing Alexander the Great. And I guess we've all found this, that once you start asking one question about a particular time period, you quite quickly find another one. And so my kind of intellectual trajectory with the projects were quite natural in that the undergrad dissertation, I can still remember what it's called, it's on the shelf over there. It was called Alexander the Great and the Constraints of Macedonian Kingship. And it was kind of about what are the limitations on power, even in a theoretically absolute monarchy, and how do kings interact with the people around them, and how do the people around them constrain the king's ability to act independently, and how does that change over time? And Alexander's quite a good example of that. And it fitted in at the time. There was some kind of, this was, what year was this, 2009? There had been in the last kind of 10, 15 years quite a lot of debates about kind of whether Macedonia was a constitutional monarchy or not. So I kind of got interested in that, and then decided to change from history to kind of classics to ancient history to do a master's. And I was lucky enough, I got a bit of funding to take a year out and to learn Greek for a year, which was a lot of fun because anyone who's learned a language will say, you can't spend 9 hours a day learning a language, can you? You've got to like break it up. So I had a lot of fun that year as well, and did a lot of other things. Yeah, so learned Greek for a year, and then I did my master's in classics. And for that, kind of, I was interested a little bit more in Alexander and the successors, and that's where I first started to get interested in royal space, which, Luis, is something we've obviously spent a lot of time discussing, going right back to your masters. Yes. So I kind of got interested in that, and then as I was getting towards I guess the master's year is a really intense year, particularly because some masters are 12 months long, like obviously the one you did, Luis, is 12 months, whereas the one I did was 9 months. And so you had written like 2 essays and it was March, and you were starting to think about a final thesis, but you're also thinking about what am I doing next year. And I had friends who were kind of applying for PhDs, so I thought, well, I'll give it a go and see what happened, and I came up with a project idea that was kind of putting Alexander into his context. So I had kind of a question that I was interested in answering. It was also that time where everyone was kind of just, or a lot of people I knew was applying for a PhD, and I thought, well, there's no harm in applying for one and seeing what happens. So I looked around a few different places, had offers from a few different places, none of them funded, and then I got a little bit of funding to stay in Cambridge, where I was for a year. Got excited about that, and then I got offered funding at Durham, and I turned it down to stay in Cambridge because I had kind of already mentally committed to doing it. But I think, like, for me, why I chose to do a PhD was, I mean, you're a long time working, essentially, was the attitude. I was having fun, I was enjoying it, I had a question I wanted to answer, and I didn't really see the need to go out and get a job in the real world.
Yeah.
At 21 or 22, which is what my friends were doing, and they were all going and doing exactly what Nigel's just talked about, going into the city and getting jobs like that. And because I'd done my kind of year out learning Greek, and then my masters, quite a lot of my friends were sort of 2 years in, and I had a lot of friends who were a bit older, so they're like 2 to 5 years into their career, and they were telling me about what they were doing in law firms and stuff, and it just sounded miserable, mate. It just sounded awful. Like, genuinely, like, people up all night, incredibly high pressure, like all of that kind of stuff. And I just thought, it'd be more fun to do a PhD, and it was.
I think
Whereas I got immensely anxious about the fact that I wasn't on a very clear kind of career path, and I never actually was on a very clear career path until I hit about 40. But I don't know whether it was partly about just me, or whether it was something about about the nature of the times. I mean, this was back in the I graduated from my undergraduate degree in 1984. With an 11.9% unemployment rate, and I felt like, I needed to progress and get a proper job in some sense, and that was kind of just what people did in those days. So, for me, the archaeological field work was a bit of a distraction. That the PhD seemed like a track into something with prospects, as it were. Little did I know, however.
Well, I think, Nigel, that's where it maybe changed a little bit between when you were doing your PhD and when I was doing mine, because I think by the time I was doing mine, which I started mine in 2011, I think maybe the numbers of people who are doing PhDs in all subjects has started to increase quite a lot by then. And I think certainly, like, my supervisors and the people that I was kind of getting advice from were very clear that, don't do a PhD don't do a PhD solely because you want a job in academia, because you statistically will be disappointed. And, those of us who've got jobs in the last decade and a half, I think all feel very grateful and fortunate, and are aware that there are, you have to get hugely lucky. Like when for my job, I got an 11-month job at Swansea in 2016, and 10 years later, I'm still here. And the job advert, I remember the job advert, Maria Pretzler was on sabbatical. They needed somebody to teach a module on Alexander the Great. How many other people in the country had just finished a PhD on Alexander the Great the year that I did? Had that module, had Maria been down to teach one of her other modules like archaic Greece, I wouldn't have been an obvious person to be shortlisted. And so, I think I maybe went into the PhD thinking it might not lead to a job in academia, but kind of having a PhD, doing a PhD will be fun. I'll enjoy it, and the skills I'll get from it will make me employable. And having that on my CV, regardless of what I want to do in my mid-20s, like, I'll be employable.
Yeah, I mean, that element of luck is massive, and it tremendously important. And I've been lucky at so many different stages of my career. But I mean, a lot of that, the whether there are jobs or not jobs or whatever, I mean, that's been the same through time. So I mean, that year that I graduated from my undergraduate degree, there was. That was really, really bad in terms of academic jobs, and I think the fact that I went on to do a PhD shows how naive I was at the time. Really, there was one academic job at Leicester, which Andrew Wallace Hadrill got, for example. And I knew all these people who were like junior research fellows and who were, like we're all applying for this job. And I mean, that was about the worst. And then when I was at Michigan doing my PhD, by the late 80s, early 90s, one of the American educational charities, I can't remember which one it was, had thought there was going to be a big shortfall of academics in the humanities in the US, starting from the mid 90s onwards. And so they were actually funding scholarships for people to have a year to do their research as PhDs, and I got one of those. But then we get to like 93, 94 when I graduated in the US, and the bottom had dropped out of the humanities academic job market completely, and there were hardly any jobs again. And I ended up coming back to the UK and thinking I was going to do something completely different. But then actually the job market was quite buoyant in the late 90s in the UK. So I got lucky in that respect. So, I think it's up and down. Things change. And it's often quite unpredictable.
Yeah. Well, I think we can all agree that besides the PhD just being fun and then leading to different outcomes, but also having its own challenges, it kind of reminds me what I've been doing with the PhD. Initially, I would say, okay, I want to go to academia, but then after hearing some thoughts, after hearing your feedback as well, that made me think, oh well, now that I finished, obviously I'm just scattering myself around to chase employability within the field, which is still ongoing, but at the same time having this tremendous amount of effort and also absorption of knowledge that I would never thought I would get something out of it. I think it was just to say that the PhD would be it is something that is fulfilling, that is so fulfilling and also exciting at the same time, of being busy in producing knowledge. And just as you said, Stephen, is rather to do that than sitting down at an office typing BS basically. And the thing is that it kind of reminds me as well, while you were talking, Stephen, it kind of reminds me of that time that you had some fun to learn Greece. At the time I finished my undergraduate, I was on an Erasmus gap year, but in context of finding an internship, which I happened to found one in Berlin, which was my golden ticket, so to speak, before jumping on to the masters.
But I think, like, you're talking about kind of going on an academic track and then coming off it and thinking about where you are now. I think, one of the things because I'm 38 now, so my mates are all 15, 16 years into their careers, and it's been quite interesting to see how a lot of friends have changed career. From the outside, it looks like quite a big career change every 3 or 4 years, and actually it's that what they've got are, if I can quote Liam Neeson, a particular set of skills, right?
Yes.
And they have those skills that let them go and do whatever looks interesting. And I think I've kind of taken this attitude into, it's going to sound ridiculous, right? I did my undergrad, my master's, and my PhD in the same place, and I spent 10 years in Cambridge. And then I got an 11-month job in Swansea, and 10 years later I'm still here. So I'm going to say something that sounds stupid, because it looks from the outside like I've just been on a very obvious track all the way through. But one of the things I've learned from my friends is, I think you don't need to think 10 years down the line in terms of career. Maybe I'm at the point now with career development where I need to think a bit more long term and plan for things a little bit more. But I think you can think in 2 or 3 year cycles, and I think it's really important. And the thing I've always tried to do is make an active choice to do the thing that I'm going to do, rather than just fall into it. So I didn't just assume that I would stay in Cambridge after my master's to do my PhD. I looked at other places, I talked to lots of people, and then I made the decision to stay. When I kind of first was thinking about going into academia, I didn't just apply for academic. Well, in the end, I did just apply for academic jobs, but I didn't just look at academic jobs. I basically just because of when I finished, like my Viva was in October, so my corrections took me through to January. So then I was like, well, the job round will start in March, and I had a little bit of part-time work that I was doing anyway. So I said, look, I'll give myself one round of academic jobs. But while I was doing that, I looked at think tanks. I looked at kind of grad schemes. I looked at civil service, and I looked at all of the different things. And what I was trying to do is I was talking to people who worked in those jobs, and I said, look, just describe your 9 till 5 to me. So for example, I talked to somebody at a think tank where, you know, they're doing lots of research, and I think a lot of what they do sounds really interesting. But then I was like, but if you're doing that, somebody else is telling you what you need to go away and research, whereas if I can stay in academia, I can dictate the terms of that myself. So I was kind of weighing those things up. But then I had the 11-month contract, and then I got offered the opportunity to stay for the second year, and that when my contract got renewed, and that was another opportunity where I thought, okay, have I enjoyed this enough that I want to do this, or do I want to look at other opportunities? And there's been 3 or 4 times where I've kind of made those decisions, and I've had opportunities to leave Swansea and go other places, and I've kind of been weighing up what is best for me, you know. And I think it's really important to kind of always be actively saying, like, how do I develop my career? What's the route I want to take? Am I on the path now that I thought I would be on, or that I want to be on in the future?
Yeah. And I do think also that I'm saying from a PhD perspective that it makes you proactive, and you gain proactivity skills in order to map out what are the other ventures that I could choose from, and making a sort of a mind mapping of, okay, here's the list of opportunities that I go for, both academic and non-academic, while at the same time building some skills that can be transferable to the future, and just having a patience game essentially to reach any one of those outcomes, if it is, as you said, your 11-month contract at Swansea University, and then afterwards having that opportunity, making a self-reflection of yourself, and okay, they gave me this opportunity, grab it or leave it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, when I finished my PhD, I very much envisaged that I would become an academic, and probably in the US as well. And I interviewed for a few jobs, but it was really competitive there. And I mean, I had a 1-year job in the US after my PhD. I had a 1-year job on an American program in Italy after I did my PhD as well. But there came a point where I basically moved back to the UK because I couldn't stay in the US any longer, at least legally. And so I figured I was out of academia at that point. And in terms of, so I went several years before I got another academic job. And a lot of that time I spent working as a university administrator, because it was a world I knew. And initially I moved back in with my parents, who lived near the Open University in Milton Keynes. So I was an academic administrator at the Open University. And a bit later on, I started working on early educational technology for the Open University as a consultant. So this was kind of early web-based learning and early use of ebooks in learning and things like that. But I was kind of looking around and thinking of other things and looking at other opportunities at the time. So, I did a travel agent course because I figured I might try and set myself up as a sort of, travel agent, focusing on my expertise in Mediterranean world, cultural travel, that kind of thing. So I did a BTEC.
I think given what's happened in some of the regions that you're an expert in, Nigel, I think it's really good that you didn't go down the route of kind of travel guides taking people on holiday through Syria. I think the bottom might have fallen out of that market for you at some point.
Yeah, but I fancied focusing it on Italy, somewhere where we could go for a nice lunch rather than necessarily have to dodge extremist violence of one kind or another. But But connected with that, another completely unrelated route that I was really interested in was actually psychiatric nursing and counselling, because that was at the time that was an interest of mine. My and my mother for non-psychiatric reasons was in and out of hospital a bit at that time, and I was actually kind of ended up talking to nurses and things like that, saying, well, I actually quite fancy nursing, possibly psychiatric nursing. And they said, well, I think, but I'm too old. And they were saying, no, because I was about Stephen's age then, but a little bit younger. They say, no, you're not too young to train to do that. But it did seem like a big commitment trying to get the, like funding and do another 2 or 3 years or something to train to do something when I just spent 6 years training to do something that hadn't panned out. So there were also, but to a great degree, I think it was luck that I got back into academia, because I spent a year at the British School at Rome, rather as a rather random consolation prize for not having. I got a research fellowship because I'd applied for a job there that I hadn't got, and they said, well, actually, but if you want to stay on and do a year's research, and that got me to a postdoctoral research assistant job in Oxford, because it was focusing on providing research assistance connected with excavations in the city of Rome for Margareta Stainby, who was the professor of archaeology of the Roman Empire there at that point. And that kind of sucked me back into academia. So and in some ways, a lot of the stuff that I've done over the last 10 years or so has taken me outside of strictly academic worlds, and I enjoy that a lot. And in some ways, I perhaps wish I'd been a bit more imaginative, or things had gone a different way after I'd finished the PhD. I mean, it was never something I was so committed to that I couldn't envisage, that I would have been like a starving independent researcher or something like that. I always would have been looking to do something more substantial, and I wasn't afraid to go off in other directions. But in the end, I just and then from Oxford, I ended up coming to Swansea, and that was really luck. And so, in some senses, it sort of worked out through a series of opportunities that came up. But actually, if it had gone in another direction, I think, while it would have been quite daunting thinking of going in that other direction at the time, it probably would have worked out in another way. So
just on what you said there, Nigel, I think it is. I think you sort of said it wasn't the be all and end all for you, and I think I feel like that as well. I honestly had never thought about applying for an academic job until I was in my Viva, because at the end of my Viva, my external examiner, Tom Harrison, and my internal, Paul Millett, just sort of said, some things you'll need to fix for the thesis, but like what we're really thinking about is how you turn it into a book. And I was like, a book? You reckon this could be a book? Really? And then and I'd never thought of it like that, and kind of then sort of had a little chat about kind of careers and sort of that was and I think you spend a huge amount of time in academia feeling stupid, that there's always somebody in the room who's cleverer than you, whichever room you're in, there's always somebody, right? And I think that your academic ideas, if you're not careful, become very much an extension of you. And so when somebody criticizes your idea, it feels like a deeply personal criticism of you as a human being, which, sometimes the way people phrase things makes it seem like it is, and it shouldn't be done like that. But I think having the attitude that there are other things in the world that you could be good at, I think helps you keep the perspective you need to maintain your sanity when you're finishing a PhD, coming out of a PhD, thinking about going into an academic job. And I also think it makes you, I don't know, it feels like it maybe makes you more employable as well, showing that you've got the rounded interests, you've got the people skills, that you've worked in a few different jobs that are going to let you relate to different kinds of people and things. You know, if you think about being a lecturer now, we relate to people from all different walks of life and stuff. So some of the things that I had done that took me beyond academia, you know, for example, I did a lot of sports coaching growing up. That puts you in a very different environment with very different kinds of people, which actually are skills that I draw on now all the time, you know.
Yeah, and I think bringing those skills from other jobs, or whether they are seasonal or a bit temporary, then they will be transferable anyways to what you're actually doing. For example, now I was looking for a job. I'm still flipping chicken at Nando's.
Yeah. But also,
and sometimes I laugh at myself, not because I'm flipping chicken and say, oh, I'm flipping this as if I was doing as I was fighting against the Persians at the Battle of Gaugamela, for example. I said that once to a colleague of mine who was taking civil engineering and gave up in his second year of his undergrad. And I said, okay, let's build something with chicken and corn, for example. And then I say, okay, this is Alexander, and the chicken is Darius. And so we were just playing around when under stress. So,
yeah. But I think the thing is, I think in your PhD, you ostensibly have a huge amount of time to do research.
yes.
And then you get an academic job, and the amount of time that you've got to do research completely disappears. If you think, I was on a teaching contract the first 6 or 7 years that I was in Swansea, right? So I don't have any research time in my contract, although you try to do some. You know, the first year that I was in Swansea, I was teaching 3 different modules across the year. So it's not that much teaching, but then you go, that's 125 hours of lectures that you've got to write. And now I can write a lecture in 15 minutes because I've got material, I know how to do it. I can just sit there and go bang, bang, bang. But I'm starting out, it's taken me 5-6 hours to write a lecture because you just don't know what students need. You always put too much in it. You're always far too prepared. If you've got 5 hours to write a lecture, it'll take you 5 hours. If you've got half an hour, it'll take you half an hour, right? Sure. And then you have all the administrative stuff that you need to do in the job. And it can mean that actually finding research time is really tricky. I think coming into the career, having gone, well, I had 6 different part-time jobs during my PhD. I'm used to, as you say, right, I was never flipping burgers, but I was always doing something, you know, working on a library desk or whatever, where you're serving customers and things. But in the back of your mind, you're thinking about a project, and you're used to being able to say, well, I've got an hour between my lectures here. I need to do something useful. Well, that's a little bit like when I was doing my PhD and I was between these jobs and stuff. And I think it makes the transition into the reality of an academic job a little bit easier. And I think people who have been fortunate enough to have had funding and have been able to just kind of focus their entire time on the research sometimes find the transition trickier.
Yeah, I also had other small income streams, jobs. When my last one was as a mentor of languages and culture, and it was so fulfilling. I was able to to share the diverse cultures and languages for young UK pupils about that, and they really enjoyed about hearing a bit of Portuguese, for example. But go back to you were saying, I think it's having these small experiences that makes you even more proactive, as I said previously, but also it will help you to reach what the so-called North Star, whether it's an academic job or a non-academic one.
Yeah.
So, I'd like to ask as well, because I think you've already answered about if you whether consider any other paths or you just academia like the one-way road towards it. I think it's just crystal clear that you have already answered to that one. I do wonder that because of the different time spans of your PhDs, Nigel graduated in the 90s and you already in the 2010s, how then the PhD degree changed in terms of academic research and structure?
Well, in my case, I don't know that I can make a judgment about how it's changed over time, because my PhD experience was a completely different one in the US because it's structured in a completely different way. So my US PhD took 6 years. And actually, if I'd known that when I went there, I would have thought twice about doing it. I thought I could kind of do it in 3 or 4 years, but actually 6 years was relatively good progress for that. And in the US, a PhD is a program, only about half of which is spent focusing on producing what we call in the UK called a thesis, and what the US calls a dissertation. And bizarrely, the two terms are flipped in US and British use. So I kind of got there, and actually I found myself more timetabled in the US system as a PhD student than I had been as an undergraduate in the UK system. I was doing coursework, advanced coursework for 3 years. I had to do a whole range of courses on Greek painted pottery, Roman sculpture, Greek and Roman architecture, all of these kinds of things. There were language requirements. I had to do exams or the equivalent in Latin, Greek, French, and German, and then two big sets of comprehensive exams to test me on the stuff that, and there'd been assignments in all the individual classes or the individual modules as well. And so I spent a good 3 years or so doing that. And also I did a lot of field work in Egypt, in Italy, in Tunisia, in the vacations from that. I was working part-time as well, half time as a teaching assistant or a research assistant through that. And then for the last 2.5 years or so, that was when I focused on my thesis topic. And I selected. I probably should have worked on a research topic that was connected with Rome and Italy, because actually, my Italian was pretty good even back then, and I liked working in Italy and stuff like that. But again, being foolishly naive at the time, I thought, well, there's so many people working on Rome and Italy, and I'd been working with a lot of them, thinking, I can't do anything original on Rome and Italy. And I started focusing more on the Eastern Roman Empire, and ended up working on things connected with Roman Egypt and Roman Syria. And then I did my 2.5 years. I wrote my thesis, and that was it. But it's a completely different experience from doing a PhD in the UK back then, or presumably now. Well, now based on my experience of supervising you, but presumably based on Stephen's experience as well.
Yeah, but I think it's that thing, isn't it, that the American system, because in America people specialize much later than we do. I think that early part of a PhD program that you've just described, Nigel, is the kind of thing that traditionally people would have thought here takes place in a master's.
Yeah,
and some of it in undergrad even.
And I never did a formal master's, and it was because it wasn't a requirement for the program. And then just a couple of years into the program, when you've passed your first set of exams, they get together and say, "Oh, I think you probably deserve to get a master's degree at this point," so they just give you one. But also because I'd done quite a lot of that, particularly the language stuff already as an undergraduate, it meant that I didn't have to do all of that, and I could take advantage of some other things on offer, like anthropology courses in particular, which I really enjoyed and got really interested in. So yeah, as you say, it's a kind of it was an expectation that the Americans would be specializing rather later.
And to be honest, I like that system, and I did look at a few US places, and I decided not to apply in the end. I think had I not done the PhD immediately after the masters, I might have looked more seriously at some places in America. And I think one of the reasons I like it is I think maybe one of the things that's changed isn't to do with the PhD itself, because I don't think the process of the PhD has changed at all, really, in that what you're required to do hasn't changed. You're required to come up with an idea that no one's come up with before, which is hard, and you've got somewhere between 80 and 100,000 words to write to do that, yeah. And because that's not changed, I think that the way in which it's taught is essentially the same all over the UK, isn't it? One-on-one meetings with your supervisor, bring in your second supervisor occasionally as a second pair of eyes, da da da. I think maybe some of the things that I mean, it might just be kind of my experience. Like I felt, maybe I don't quite feel it anymore, but certainly during my undergrad, my master's, and my PhD, and then the first 5 years that I was working, you've got the career ladder, and then you've got the bloke who's clinging on to the bottom rung of the career ladder. I always thought of myself as the person holding onto his feet.
Yeah.
And I think, when I look at kind of my skill set, and I think I wish that there were things that I had done earlier in my life, particularly around languages and training, which would have helped me now. Like, for example, I'm sort of pseudo half teaching myself Babylonian cuneiform, right? To help me a little bit with some of the research that I do. I wish that I had spent 3 months taking advantage of opportunities in my master's to do that, and I wouldn't need to do it now. But when I was doing my master's, the most important thing was getting the grade that would let me get on the PhD, which meant that I could only really focus on the things that I was being assessed on. And like that's probably true in the British system, from GCSEs to A levels to your undergrad to your masters to your PhD. And within the PhD, there's a bit of scope to kind of grow skills and things. But then, in some sense, it's tricky. Yeah, but I don't think the actual process of doing a PhD or teaching a PhD has changed much in the last little while. I think maybe where some of the things have changed is where there are kind of doctoral programs, AHRC doctoral programs, and people have funding. I think that funding bodies have become much better in the UK of ensuring that they, or at least trying to ensure that they prepare the students they are funding for a world beyond academia. I think when I was doing my PhD, for all I said, people said, don't expect to become an academic. I think there was the attitude that would be the first choice for everybody. And by the end of your PhD, a lot of people don't want to do it because the last few months of the PhD, you've just done it. Like the last few months of the PhD are pretty miserable, aren't they? Like I was doing all-nighter after all-nighter. Like, I remember leaving the library. Jenny, I met my now wife in the kind of like final 6 months of my PhD, and I do not know how she put up with me. But she worked in the building. She worked in a museum in the building where our library was. And I remember like bumping into her as she was walking into work because I was going home having been up all night, and it's like a miserable process. But I think funders now have recognized that they need to do more to ensure that students are prepared for the wider world. I think people who aren't funded don't always have that support, and I think that that's an area that will change in the next 5 to 10 years. But I think part of the reason that things will change at PhD level is that things are changing at undergraduate level with regard to kind of preparation for employment. There's more connections now between what we're doing as academics and the world of work and with industry, and because when I was an undergrad, and it's not that long ago, there's a really good career service, and your lecturers would say go to the career service, and literally nobody would. Like nobody I knew went to the career service. Maybe once people had a job interview, they went and said like, what kind of questions might they ask me? But now I think we're doing a lot more to embed kind of employability skills into the teaching that we're doing and making it clear to students what we're doing. And I think once we start to see the benefits of that, and I think we are starting to see the benefits of that, once we see the benefits of that at undergrad, that'll feed into masters, and it will feed in a little bit more to what we do with PhD students, particularly given like the job market, because I do think that we have a responsibility to make sure that our students are prepared.
I think there's a big important point to touch on, that is that this from all these years that I've studied in my PhD, and then obviously and then my master's, when I started beginning to understand a bit of the British higher education system, is that there is a bit of more of a professional preparation to the world of the working world, where not only we're just going to have to do our dissertations, but also seeking opportunities of getting some training. I never expected to have some to run some training courses on introduction to research integrity, or safeguarding in the workplace, or any other professional body of certificate that I would need to have some certificates in order to use them as a proof that I did something in order to get some of those transferable skills to the outside world. So I think in many ways that is a good thing to communicate on our CVs to any prospective employer. So, and changing on the topic of, now you both are supervisors. You supervised me, and it was a great experience, so I have to give credit for that. But how is the challenge of being a PhD supervisor?
Can I go first with this? Because I think the biggest challenge is that it's absolutely bloody terrifying. Do you know, so you know, I was your second supervisor. I was the second supervisor for another person who graduated a couple of years ago. I've had one of my own PhD students who I supervised complete, and I've got somebody else who's nearly finished, right? It's terrifying being responsible for 4 years of your life, mate. Do you know what I mean? Like, because like we're giving you advice about what directions to go in, and like ultimately you're going to submit your work when we tell you we think it's good.
Yes.
You're not going to do it before then. And that is it. That is a huge amount of pressure. And I think when I started kind of supervising, would I have been 33? And like that's about right. I started supervising my first PhD student when I was still on a tutor contract. I wasn't on my own research contract, and it all went fine. But I think that the challenge is like there is a little bit of training now about supervising PhD students. I don't think there was 10 years ago, and the majority of people most of what we do in life, we kind of draw on our own experiences and then work out the way we want to do it. Yeah. But as a PhD supervisor, well, you had one, and that's about the limit of your experience. So you're kind of like talking to people and working out how to do that. I think that that's hard. And then I think the other thing that I find hard is keeping the right level of critical distance between a project, because I think, and this is, I think, why having two supervisors is really important, because I think you as a student need to know that your first supervisor loves you and thinks you're brilliant and you need to know that they're in your corner, right? Because you need to have absolute implicit trust in them.
Yes.
And that can, as a supervisor, sometimes make it quite hard and we all have these periods, but you might have a period in a PhD where for 3 or 4 months it's a bit of a slog. You might feel it as a student, it's a bit of a slog, and the ideas might not be coming that you need, and that can be quite hard. It's a bit easier as a second supervisor to come in after a year and be bad cop, and say like, look, this isn't, and be honest and just be like this. So I think it's that balance of like not getting too close to a project, because we work so closely with you that we know what you're trying to say, and sometimes if you haven't quite said it, we miss that. So it's keeping that distance while also making it clear to the person you're supervising, like, I think this is really good, and I think you're really good, and I value you, and things like that, you know.
I mean, I think you're right about that sense of responsibility. It's is kind of, I do kind of lie awake worrying at night sometimes if if something's not going well for a PhD student or another research student or something like that. It is and to some degree I think that's increased. But I mean, when I did my US PhD, I had a dissertation committee, so I had a wider range of people who I could consult beyond my even not just a primary and a secondary supervisor. It does feel it is a big sense of responsibility that when you're supervising somebody. I think that there are a number of different things that come to mind. There's the question. So all research students are different in terms of the amount of input and feedback they want or need, and the level of detailed engagement that they need. So when I was a PhD student, I mostly like to be left alone to produce fairly large chunks of things, and my supervisor in a large very research active university, the department, University of Michigan, he was supervising a lot of students at the same time. It didn't have, would give it a fairly cursory read over and give me some pointers and things like that, and I was really happy with that. And I would have hated it if I'd was getting constant detailed feedback all the time. But some people really like that and really need that level of structure. And so my girlfriend at the time was really really wanted and needed that constant detailed feedback from her supervisor, and that would have driven me up the wall. So I think you have to get a sense for how individual students work.
Can I just jump on that one, because I think one thing that I find that's related to that is you get quite close to a project and then you have to realize that it's not your project. And you have to, and I think one of the things I really value about my supervisor is he let me write the thesis I wanted to write. And it went beyond some of the areas that he's super interested in, but that's good. And I think I had some friends who maybe had supervisors who they felt were quite interventionist and basically said, like, you can't talk about this. If you talk about this, you'll fail your PhD. I think, there's a line. Obviously, you can't let somebody go down a completely useless path where you're not going to get, there's a responsibility to make sure you keep people on track. But I think, like, giving people space to write about what they want to write about in the way that they want to write about it. And I do joke that I can be quite interventionist when it comes to like phrasing, particularly, and how things are done. And I remember, with one of my students, there was one particular, I just started like a list of banned phrases, and that's much more interventionist than I would have wanted to be, but I think it was valuable in that context, because if you use the same phrase 400 times if you use the same three-word phrase 400 times in your thesis, that means 1,200 words are the same, so change them. But I think letting the student helping the student find the path that they want to be on, and then let them do the project their way, even if you're thinking, oh, actually, I would have prioritized this bit of evidence rather than this one, but letting them make the decisions is a challenge.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point, and I wasn't even thinking that through when I was talking about it, but that the supervisor who wants you to write the thesis they want rather than the thesis you want and that was I was aware of that when I was a postgraduate as well. There was another guy who was a really nice guy who was supervising one of my friends who was seemed to be, to me, very controlling in terms of shaping my friend's thesis in a way that my supervisor wasn't. So, but I think that I'm at language and stuff like that. I think that I'm quite interventionist on that as well, but on some level, that's superficial, not in a bad way, but it's not shaping the core of what the thesis is. It's helping the student to present it as effectively as possible, and get rid of those repetitive cliches and the kind of the wordiness that creeps into stuff. So
at the end, it becomes quite common to write the same thing, write more or less the same thing, but having these supervision feedback it is useful, because it can lead to a different outcome while writing something quite similar to it. And I think that's a good point. And also the other point is that that the PhD itself isn't just only one author. It's just the main author, obviously the student, but at the same time you have at your side a huge academic staff and non-academic staff that is helping you, is giving you feedback, and besides besides you guys give me the feedback on the different topics, my current partner has been helping me with the English, right? And so the language and the tone and the structure was really helpful when she was intervening on the final hurdles of my dissertation, and say you better to cut this off because it feels quite repetitive. Of
But I
what
think,
you said
and
previously.
I think even if you're not, obviously you're writing in a language you didn't grow up speaking, which is it's a different challenge.
It is.
particularly when you're exposed to academic English and Nando's English, which is a sort of slightly different. It's a slightly different kind of. But I think even if you're right, I would get people to read stuff, and I still get people to read stuff, particularly with the popular book that I wrote. I made sure that was read by non-academics, but because so often we get kind of caught up in trying to sound clever, and it's like, don't try to sound clever, just be clever, and show that you're clever and have an idea.
Yeah, and that's also issue of with the only single authorship that people still confused. Even I heard some PhDs themselves that thought this is a long and lonely road, and I said no, it isn't. You have people who are by your side and they are helping you to do that. So claiming that the PhD is entirely yours, yes, but at the same time, no. So,
I mean, it's good to hear that you view it that way, because for me, kind of on a challenge in a sense, or a concern with working with PhD students in this system is the extent to which doing a PhD in a sort of UK style might be quite isolating.
Yeah.
And in a way that perhaps it wasn't so much for me in the American system, because having gone through those 3 years of coursework with a bunch of people, we and in also quite a large graduate program, that we were actually quite a close community in terms of support. Whereas if you go in the UK system, you go to a university that where you don't already have a support network, and you start a 3-4 year PhD there, and you're focused on what you're doing. I mean, it is a concern as a supervisor that the student might feel kind of isolated, and that might have impacts on mental health and things like that. But so it's good to hear that you had an awareness that there were other people supporting you through that process.
Yeah. And I think just on that, I think that's it's really important what you just said, and it's also a tricky balance, I think, as a supervisor to get, because how do we phrase it? Like, when I started doing my PhD, we had a weekly seminar, and somebody said to me, if you give one paper a term at the weekly seminar, by the end of 3 years, you'd have done 9 papers, and that's a PhD. So that's essentially what I did, yeah. And I think you spend much more time with your peers than you do with your supervisor. You might see your supervisor, an hour a month, potentially, depending on what stage you are. Maybe it's every couple of weeks. In some, it varies depending on the student, but you're not seeing your supervisor as much as you're seeing your peers. So it's important to kind of make sure that you have the right environment. And I think as members of staff, you try to help create that environment. So you support things like kind of graduate work in progress things. You support weekly seminars that grads want to run and stuff. But there's also an element where people need to have the drive to do it themselves, and they need because I think an important part of preparing you for an academic world, and we've talked so much about the wider world as well, is actually being a self-starter who's got a bit of gumption, who's got a little bit of like, oh, you know what, I wish there was more of this going on. Well, and Lewis, you're a good example. You're like, oh, I wonder what it would be like to start a podcast. So you started a podcast, like you've just got to try, you have to. So I think, yeah, making sure that you take advantage of support networks, but that you actively seek out ways to build your own is a really important balance. And if it doesn't, universities need to have those systems in place to make sure students aren't struggling.
Yeah.
But also, it's on a community of graduate students to create what they need themselves a little bit and take responsibility for that. And the employability outcomes of doing that are really valuable.
Yeah.
How many conferences did you organize? 2 or 3 in the time?
I've organized 3, and
Yeah.
curiously, I'm thinking in seeking. In my network. I'm thinking in talking to a person who has some similar research interests to set up a conference in the near future. But this is just an idea, so
Yeah. If anyone's listening to this who's doing a PhD or wants to do a PhD, 3 conferences is too many. 2's enough.
That's true.
And also don't organize a conference in the final year of your PhD. I'm not sure if you did that, but that's
No.
good. Don't do it in the final year. Do it in
No.
do it in year 2. Do it in year 2.
You need
I've
to
never
only-
organized. I've never organized a conference in my life, and I have no plans to.
Yeah.
Don't organize, and also just having the seeking of the balancing in you doing rather just 2 or 3, as you said, Stephen, rather than doing 100 and you never and not finishing your PhD and you have to delay it.
Yeah,
Right?
but it's also what's the point of, it's the like, do it at a point where it's strategic for you. So if you try to organize something in first year, you don't really know what your project is. Like, great, you can meet some people, just go along with stuff. Second year, you've got a good idea, you've got a bit of time, you can organize it. But also, if you meet people from it, and there's networks that you're starting to form, or whatever, or if you organize a conference and there's going to be an edited volume from it, from doing the conference to an edited volume coming out, you need at least 18 months or 2 years. So do it in your second year so the thing can be out when you're finishing your PhD, rather than trying to do it in fourth year and then it being 2 years in the wilderness trying to find a job before the thing comes out that you've worked really hard on. So it's like thinking strategically about these opportunities.
Yeah, I think that too. And I also had with the PhD community, all that things with me doing PhD lounge since the beginning of the PhD, by the way, and also having other things to be active. I mean, we have in Swansea Uni we have a PhD community, and some of them they do talks just in a more relaxed way, and I think curiously there's one happening tomorrow, but it's outside of Singleton campus, and many people they join, and now they've extended the concept into setting up different groups on WhatsApp. So tomorrow there will be a cycling event, and then many PhDs will go, and also PhDs who receive the award are more than welcome to jump on board.
Good.
So, and since we were talking about the outcomes of getting to academia or not getting into an industry job, and now we're facing all this existential crisis of the academic redundancies, which is just a real thing. I've signed up the petition, by the way. This was a long time ago. I spoke with Nigel about that as well. And also with the PhDs in trying to at least get a foot on the door on any employment. Do you still think that there will be new opportunities for PhD talents like myself and other ones to get either into academia, or would you reckon that industry would be, well, non-academic roles would be a better alternative?
I mean, look, I hope it's come across to listeners. You guys both know me. I'm a very positive person, and the answer to the question you just asked isn't one where actually I think the answer is quite negative. I think, is it better to try to get in academia than into industry is a question for the individual. I
agree.
I think that's up to individuals to explore.
I agree on that.
Do I think that there's going to be a mass load of opportunities in higher education in the UK in the next 2 to 3 years? No, I don't. And I think that there will also be some incredibly qualified people on the job market who have lost jobs, left jobs, not being able to get jobs, because I think, where it's not just that job cuts are happening in lots of universities now, it's that people haven't been hired out of their PhD for quite a long time. I think if you went through humanities departments, particularly in all UK universities, and counted the number of people who were permanently employed and under the age of 33, I think you'd get a very short list. So I think that people who are graduating now are competing against people who graduated 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I think that there will still be quite a robust postdoc market, because that stuff is kind of, the funding there is often external and it's not connected directly to university finances, and I think there's still a strong market there. And I think ultimately there will be a kind of rebalancing and a period of recovery, but I think I don't think there's going to be loads of jobs this year, next year, the year after, unless there's a fundamental change of policy regarding HE funding, which is a shame.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think, Nigel.
Yeah, I mean that sounds realistic, certainly. Although, as I said, through my own early career lifetime, there were so many lurches up and down from the mid 80s, one ancient history job, through the late 80s in America, where everybody said there were going to be loads and loads of academic jobs, and then there weren't in the early 90s, but then there were more academic jobs in Britain. So things do change, certainly. I mean, they don't change overnight. And there might be unforeseen structural changes that lead to more jobs of some kind. But then on the other hand, as I've said when we were discussing this in more detail early on, I wish in some senses I'd been more flexible and kind of braver in running with some of those alternative career ideas that I'd gone with, because I think doing the PhD was a worthwhile experience in itself, and I think it developed. I think I already had things to offer, and the PhD developed some of those skills further and gave me new skills. And I think actually, I could have been equally happy or possibly happier going in another direction at that point. So, I mean, it doesn't look good at the moment. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if you're willing to be a bit entrepreneurial and flexible about what.
Yeah, and I think I have a couple of related thoughts to that as well, which are, number one, I think that if there are opportunities for universities to hire, and I should say I have absolutely no intel on this at all, this is entirely just me guessing, but I think that universities will want to hire young people, because I think they will look at the makeup of their department. Obviously, they can't hire a young person over an old person just because they're young. There's protected characteristics to think about. But I think the positions that will become available will probably be ones that are more suited to younger people, that will be less well paid. They'll be tutor grade rather than lecture grade, or lecturer grade rather than associate professor or whatever. So that's one thing that might happen. One of the other things that I hope happens, which humanities academia is awful at, is I'd like to see more opportunities for people to move between industry and academia, because you see it in other academic departments that we know in Swansea, but I've got friends in other places who've got people who come in having worked in a period and then they go out of academia and do something else and then they come back to it. And I think there might be a little bit more like that, particularly when we're kind of thinking a little bit more just from kind of history classics lens, a little bit more about like applied learning, a little bit more about embedding employability into a curriculum to give students opportunities. Things like heritage sectors might be a little bit easier to cross between heritage and academia and back again in the next, I'm not talking about next year, I'm talking about the next 20 years. I think there might be a little bit more flexibility there. And it might also see, I think, universities start to recognize and value a broader set of skill sets when they're hiring, because certainly when I was and I think it probably is still true. The most important thing now is your research for an academic job, and its connection to the REF, the kind of research excellence framework. That's the most important thing. But I think everyone's got good research, and people will be interested in some of the tiebreakers, and some of the stuff we've talked about are the kind of tiebreakers that might help people get jobs.
Yeah, I do think that's a great way of telling to many of us PhDs to just to be realistic on their own goals, and as long as you go throughout your PhD, your perspective each year you go through, your perspective of checking employment will change.
Yeah, but I think my attitude to it is that, and Nigel and I both said, like, we feel like we got hugely lucky in our career, and I think you could speak to every academic, and no matter where they're employed at, no matter their track record, and I think most of them would say at some point they got a little bit of luck that an opportunity fell in their lap. And what you have to do is be prepared for that opportunity to come your way by doing all the things that you can do, so that when the opportunity comes, you can take advantage. If the door's open, the door might be open a tiny bit, and it's your job to kick it down and get in there.
Yeah, with the right, I think it's also with the right network that you have, and building it strategically and quite strategically, and not randomly, then something will come up. And I think it's just us needs to be quite patient on that, and just building that resilience that something will come up. I say even to my parents, and even to my PhD colleagues, and say, look, we might get a job straight away, but realistically, it won't be happen on day and night. It's gonna take quite a struggle, and just the only thing is just to move on and apply for it, and then move on and see how it goes. If it isn't this job, then the job will be next. If it isn't that next one, then will be another one. It's just focusing on your research, and then reinforce your skill set that you have already.
Yeah, I also think people have hugely unrealistic expectations or understandings of how academia has ever worked, and I think Nigel's corrected some of them here. But I think when I was doing my PhD, like, I think everyone just thought you did your PhD and then you got a job and that was it, and you were set for life. And like, obviously that's obvious, and I think I know one person for whom that happened, and they're a genius. But like, that's not what happens. People get short-term teaching contracts. You get a short-term postdoc. But that is also true in the wider world. Like, if you want to work in museums, if you want to work in the heritage sector, Nigel talked about like field archaeology being short-term contracts. Like, all of this stuff is dependent on funding, so it's renewable, so it's short-term contracts, and like, that's tricky.
That's tricky.
But I think if you're aware of that, it makes it a bit easier to be not surprised that is the situation when you get there.
You were saying something, Nigel?
Yeah, I'm just. I mean that. I'm at least when I was younger, I wasn't especially comfortable with change and upheaval and that kind of thing, which makes it all the more remarkable that I actually went to the US to do my PhD. But then after I finished my PhD, I kind of, because of also my expectations of the job market, I thought things would settle down. Little did I know that it would be another 7 years before I had a kind of a job that was open-ended in the sense of not being fixed term, and I think if I'd been aware of that and been more comfortable with that when I finished my PhD, and kind of known that this is the way it's going to be for a bit, and I might have been a bit more again kind of adventurous and a bit more comfortable with what was going on, rather than kind of stressed by it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and then I think all that matters is just to be, for any PhD out there, just to be open-minded for for the circumstances, and you'll get you'll get an amazing experience doing the
Yeah.
PhD, but at the same time,
And kind of
yeah,
be mindful about it, you know, kind of try to enjoy the experience of what you're doing at the time, if you can, rather than necessarily just thinking of it as a, you
Yeah.
know, as a way to get your ultimate goal or whatever that might be.
Yeah, and, you know, that's the message, isn't it? Like, my advice to people who talk to me about should I do a PhD, my advice is, are you genuinely curious about this? That's got to be your number one motivation. Do you have some questions that you want to understand and you want to find an answer to? If you're doing it because it's a stepping stone to something else, you're going to hate it. It's going to be a slog. It's 3 or 4 years of your life, and you know, yes, you should enjoy it when you're doing it, but there's going to be bits when you hate it. Because there's bits about every part of your life that you hate at some point. You know what I mean? Like there's where you're like, why am I doing this? You know, why am I still playing football with 21-year-olds when I'm 38? There's times when I enjoy it, and there's times when I feel like a slow old man. Like, you know, that's one of the bits of my life that I enjoy. And it's the same with like doing a PhD or a research project. You're gonna have highs and lows with it. But I think, like Nigel's point, if you can stand back from it and try to enjoy it while you're doing it, but the best way to enjoy it is to go into it with the right idea of what it is, what it's for, and why you're doing it.
and I think that would be a great advice for any PhD who's listening to this late night session, and to also those who want to go for a PhD. You've probably had someone at the end of their undergraduate or even at your masters and would say, "I want to do a PhD." What are your thoughts on it? And probably you might have that as well, without mentioning names, of course.
What do you think, Nigel?
I to be honest, I didn't hear that question particularly well. So, was it something about how you'd what your advice would be to somebody? Do well, you know, yeah, it's exactly what Stephen was just saying. If you're interested in it and it's something you actually want to spend 3 years, 4 years of your life doing, without an expectation that it will lead directly to something, then yeah, go ahead, you know, but be aware that it's not a meal ticket to an academic job. And I think most people in that situation now realize that. As I said, I think in many ways I was quite naive when I applied to do a PhD. When I finished my PhD, all along, I might have felt differently if I'd been more aware of that. But yeah, you know, it's a worthwhile experience in itself. But in itself is important. It's not necessarily what it gets you.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice to say, and I mean, I just want to say thank you for your time, for having the availability, and now having this circling moment and quite informal to just to have a conversation on the podcast. It was really great to have you both in here and then spread your thoughts to anyone who wants to do a PhD, and also the reality of doing a PhD and then post PhD, and then your experience as both supervisors and lecturers, which is positive. And so I really appreciate your time.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having us. And hopefully, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we'll get to see you walk across a stage.
Yes.
Hopefully, graduation in July. Yeah.
Maybe right hand my fist to say yes, I made it. No. And so, do you have any other things would you like to share? Any upcoming projects that you are on research leave, Stephen? Also, so
I'll plug something.
You've also written a book as well, which is great.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Plug some things. If people want to find out about Alexander the Great, they can buy Alexander the Great: Lives and Legacies, which is a fun biography of Alexander. Yeah, and in the process of getting a new kitchen, so buy some copies, please. Other things I can plug. I've started a YouTube channel fairly recently.
All right.
So you can get me on YouTube at Stephen Harrison History. Stephen Harrison, Stephen with a PH. I'm doing kind of weekly deep dives into ancient history. So the thing I've just done was the death of Philip II of Macedon. The week before that, I did Every time Alexander the Great has been mentioned in the UK Parliament since the year 1800. That's what I've been looking. That's what I've been doing a bit of research about that. So, yeah, and you can get me on. You can get me on Instagram as well at Stephen Harrison History as well. And you get some little shorts there.
All right. Did you all? I do remember that you had a Twitch channel as well at the time of COVID.
Yeah, I'm not doing
So
that.
you still
That
doing it?
was I was doing. Yeah, I was doing. During COVID, we were doing kind of like daily live streams and study streams with me. I called it Good Morning Macedonia because I was teaching Macedonia, and we did like 10, 15 minutes on Twitch every day, and then we started doing kind of like longer study sessions, which was fun. Yeah, but that's a good. We talk about opportunities. Like I knew what Twitch was, but I didn't have a huge amount, to do with it before then.
Hmm.
But we ended up writing that. We ended up doing that, doing some research on how it was being received by students, and we wrote it up into an article that got published. So,
Okay, that's great.
Hmm.
That's great. Oh, and by the way, just no pun intended. Are you still drinking Pepsis and Coca-Colas?
Very much so, drinking.
I'm just about to ask.
Yeah, honestly, man. Yeah, I get too much. I was teaching. I was doing this class on Alexander, and it was like Death of Alexander, and we were role playing the wars. We were role playing the wars of the successors. So everyone in the class had a character,
Yes.
and like every 10 minutes was a year, and there were different parts of the classroom with different parts of the empire, and they could get money to buy troops, and they could basically do whatever they want, right?
Uh-huh.
And somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, do you mind if I just pop out for a second?" I was like, "Oh my God, someone hates this class." And they came back with a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi Max, and they said, "Can I trade this for 10,000 troops?" And I was like, "Yes, you can." And then at the end, I suddenly panicked, and I was like, "Am I allowed to accept a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi Max from a student?" So I gave it back to him and said he had to drink it.
Oh man. What about you, Nigel? Any upcoming projects?
Yeah, always. I think I have more projects than I can complete in my foreseeable lifetime at this point, and certainly more books than I can read in my foreseeable lifetime. But yeah, I mean, I do, as you know, I do a lot of work now with practitioner audiences, armed forces, government, heritage practitioners about protection of cultural heritage in wartime, in conflicts, in modern conflicts, but based on my historical research about cultural heritage in mostly in Italy in the Second World War. So I'm spending a lot of time, working like with the Irish Defence Forces and various other groups like that, which is really really interesting. And again, it's that kind of the world outside academia and the value that has and the how refreshing it is actually to get out of an academic audience and get the feedback, the experience and feedback of of people who've been in UNIFIL in southern Lebanon, for example, being shot at by both sides. So there's that and historical projects that tie into that. So I'm finishing up a book-length project on Allied soldiers' perceptions of cultural heritage in Italy in the Second World War. So many people went to Pompeii on leave when they were serving in Italy in the Second World War and wrote about it in their diaries or memoirs or letters or whatever. So I've been working through a lot of that material, and that's really interesting, bringing that together now, trying to put together another funding bid about documentation relating to cultural heritage in the Second World War. So yeah, always lots of things going on and not enough time to get them all done in. So. But as my dad would say, it stops you hanging around on street corners. So yeah.
And I now was saying, and maybe more podcast appearances in time soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we could do this again if you'd like in a few years' time, and just having any updates of what's been happening out the world, and so that would be great.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. So
you can ask me how retirement's going.
Yes, I can do. I can do that. I can do that for sure.
You'd be back to hanging out. You'd be hanging around on those street corners again, Nigel, wouldn't you?
So when we become a professor emeritus.
I'm told the great thing about retiring as an academic is you actually get time to do the work that you would have done if the other work hadn't got in the way. So,
Yeah, well,
but not for a few years.
yeah. Yeah, for Nigel and Stephen, thank you so much, and thank you once again for being my supervisors in this course of 6 7 years, and it was great. It was a great run, and yes, let's do this again. So it's going to be a great time, and looking forward to see you maybe in coffee chats if you'd like to do so,
Yeah.
and during the graduation ceremony, because I'm be sticking around in Swansea for some time whilst looking for jobs as well, and keep grinding on PhD Lounge as well. So.
And again, many congratulations
Yeah,
to you
thank
on
you.
your persistence and hard work and and getting to where you have. So
yeah.
Much appreciated.
Well done. Thoroughly well
Done
done.
great. Done
Thank you
well.
so much.
So
Thank you so much. And for the students and graduates listening, thank you all for tuning in, and it's been a pleasure.